The screen fades in from black, not with an explosion or dramatic music, but with something far more intimate, a soft hum of crickets under a starlit sky. A young girl, no older than 8, sits on the porch steps of a sprawling countryside estate. Her knees are tucked close to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around them like she's trying to hold herself together against some invisible storm. This is Eleanor, though back then everyone called her Ellie. She isn't crying, she never does, but there's a quiet sadness etched into the corners of her mouth that even at this age feels too heavy for someone so small. Behind her, through the open windows of the grand house, faint voices echo. They belong to her parents, arguing again about things Ellie doesn't fully understand, yet knows enough to dread. Money, status, expectations. Whatever it is, it always leaves her feeling hollow inside, like she's just another piece of furniture they rearrange when company comes over. But tonight, unlike other nights, Ellie isn't alone. A shadow moves across the yard, carrying a lantern that casts warm, golden light onto the dewy grass. It's Martha, the nanny who has been part of their household since before Ellie was born. Unlike the stiff, formal staff who tiptoe around the family as if afraid to breathe too loudly, Martha is different. She doesn't bow or scrape. Instead, she treats Ellie with a kindness that feels almost foreign in this cold, polished world. To Ellie, Martha isn't just a caregiver. She's a confidant, a protector, and sometimes, when the loneliness becomes unbearable, the closest thing she has to a friend. "Can't sleep?" Martha asks softly, setting the lantern down beside Ellie. Her voice is gentle, tinged with the faintest hint of an accent from the small village where she grew up. There's no judgment in her tone, only understanding. Ellie shrugs, staring out at the dark expanse of fields beyond the garden. "I heard them fighting again," she admits after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "They don't think I notice, but I do." Martha sighs, sitting down next to her. For a moment, neither speaks. Then, carefully, Martha places a hand on Ellie's shoulder. "Sometimes people fight because they care too much," she says, choosing her words with deliberate care. "But that doesn't mean you have to carry all of it yourself. You're allowed to feel sad, Ellie. You're allowed to cry." And for the first time that night, Ellie lets herself lean into Martha's side, finding comfort in the warmth of her presence. In that moment, the vast emptiness inside her seems just a little less overwhelming. Years pass, and the bond between Ellie and Martha grows stronger, despite, or perhaps because of, the stark differences in their lives. While Ellie attends private schools and wears dresses tailored by designers whose names she can't pronounce, Martha works tirelessly behind the scenes, cooking meals, mending clothes, and attending to the endless needs of the household. Yet, whenever Ellie returns home during holidays or weekends, Martha is always there, waiting with a smile and a plate of freshly baked cookies. Their friendship, however unconventional, becomes a lifeline for both of them. For Ellie, Martha represents stability in a life otherwise defined by chaos and expectation. For Martha, Ellie is a reminder of everything she values most: innocence, resilience, and the simple joy of connection. Together, they create a world within the walls of the estate, one untouched by the pressures of wealth or class. But as idyllic as these moments may seem, cracks begin to form beneath the surface. As Ellie grows older, the expectations placed upon her become harder to ignore. Her parents, eager to secure their legacy, push her toward pursuits they deem worthy: prestigious internships, high-profile social events, and eventually, marriage, to someone equally wealthy and influential. Meanwhile, Martha remains steadfastly rooted in her role, quietly observing the changes in Ellie with a mixture of pride and concern. One summer afternoon, shortly before Ellie turned 16, the two sit together in the shade of an ancient oak tree near the edge of the property. The air is thick with humidity, and cicadas buzz lazily in the background. Ellie fidgets with a blade of grass, her brow furrowed in thought. "What happens if I don't want any of it?" she blurts out suddenly, breaking the silence. "All. The parties, the dresses, the everything. What if I just want to be normal?" Martha hesitates, sensing the weight behind the question. "Normal is relative, love," she replies finally. "What matters is being true to yourself. If you let others define your worth, you'll lose sight of what makes you special. Ellie nods slowly, absorbing the words. But even as she thanks Martha for the advice, a seed of doubt takes root deep within her. Because deep down, she knows that staying true to herself might come at a cost, one she isn't sure she's ready to pay. As the seasons change and Ellie transitions into adulthood, the dynamic between her and Martha shifts as well. College. Applications pile up, followed by invitations to debutante balls and networking events. With each passing year, Ellie spends less time at home and more time navigating the glittering yet suffocating world her parents have built for her. And while Martha continues to write letters and send care packages, the distance between them grows, not physically but emotionally. Then, one day, without warning, Martha disappears from Ellie's life entirely. No explanation, no goodbye, just an empty room where her belongings used to be. When Ellie confronts her parents, they brush off her questions with vague excuses about better opportunities and moving on. But the truth buried beneath layers of secrecy is far more complicated and far darker than anyone dares to admit. Martha's absence hits Ellie harder than she expects. At first, she tries to convince herself that it doesn't matter, that she's too busy with her studies, her social obligations, and the relentless pressure to excel. But late at night, when the house is silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, Ellie finds herself staring at the empty chair where Martha used to sit. It's as if a piece of her childhood has been ripped away, leaving behind a jagged hole that nothing else can fill. Her parents, oblivious or indifferent to her pain, push her forward with unrelenting determination. You're destined for greatness, her mother tells her one evening over dinner, her tone clipped and final. Don't waste your energy on trivial attachments. To them, Martha was never more than an employee, a cog in the machine that kept their lives running smoothly. The idea that Ellie might have genuinely cared for her seems incomprehensible, even laughable. But Ellie knows better. She remembers the countless hours Martha spent teaching her how to bake pies, the way she'd patiently untangle Ellie's hair after a long day outdoors, and the quiet wisdom she offered during moments of doubt. These memories linger like ghosts, haunting her whenever she least expects it. Over time, they harden into something sharper, resentment. Resentment toward her parents for dismissing Martha so callously, resentment toward herself for not fighting. Harder to keep her around, and perhaps most painfully, resentment toward Martha for leaving without a word. As the years pass, Ellie throws herself into building the life her parents envisioned for her. She graduates top of her class, lands a coveted internship at a prestigious firm, and begins attending high-profile events where she mingles with the elite. On paper, she's everything they could have hoped for: poised, intelligent, and ambitious. Yet beneath the polished exterior lies a woman who feels increasingly disconnected from the world around her. Without Martha to ground her, Ellie struggles to navigate the complexities of adulthood. Her relationships are fleeting, often ending abruptly when people realize she isn't as effortlessly confident as she appears. At work she excels, but feels hollow, as though she's merely going through the motions rather than pursuing something meaningful. Even her friendships lack depth. Most of her peers are too focused on climbing the social ladder to offer genuine support. It isn't until she meets Charles, a wealthy entrepreneur with piercing blue eyes and an air of quiet authority, that Ellie begins to feel a semblance of stability again. Charles is everything her parents dreamed of in a son-in-law: successful, well-connected, and eager to provide for her. Their courtship is swift and whirlwind-like, culminating in a lavish wedding that makes headlines in every society magazine. For the first time in years, Ellie allows herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she's found happiness. Yet, even as she walks down the aisle in a gown worth more than most people earn in a lifetime, a part of her remains uneasy. Deep down, she wonders if this life, the one her parents meticulously crafted for her, is truly what she wants. Or is she simply playing a role, wearing a mask that grows heavier with each passing day? Years later, Ellie, now known as Eleanor, and Charles have settled into a life of opulence. They live in a sprawling mansion overlooking the city, complete with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and staff who cater to their every whim. Eleanor spends her days attending charity galas, hosting dinner parties, and raising their 2 children, Sophia and James. On the surface, she appears to have it all: wealth, status, and a loving family. But beneath the facade, cracks are beginning to show. Eleanor's relationship with Charles, once passionate and exhilarating, has grown strained. He travels frequently for work, leaving her to manage the household and care for the children alone. When he is home, their conversations revolve around logistics rather than emotions, creating a growing sense of distance between them. Meanwhile, Sophia and James, bright and curious children, crave attention that Eleanor often feels too drained to give. She loves them fiercely, but the weight of her responsibilities and the lingering emptiness inside her makes it difficult to connect with them the way she wishes she could. Then, one rainy afternoon, everything changes. Eleanor is sitting in the library, sipping tea and flipping through a magazine, when the doorbell rings. Assuming it's one of the deliverymen bringing yet another package she didn't order, she calls out for the housekeeper to answer it. But moments later, a soft knock echoes through the room, followed by the hesitant voice of someone asking to see her. Curious, Eleanor sets down her cup and crosses the room. When she opens the door, her breath catches in her throat. Standing there, drenched from the rain and clutching a small suitcase, is Martha. For a moment, neither speaks. Time seems to stand still as Eleanor takes in the sight of the woman who once meant so much to her. Martha looks older now, her dark hair streaked with gray and lines etched into her face from years of hard work, but her eyes, those warm, kind eyes, are exactly the same. "Hello, Ellie," Martha says softly, using the nickname only she ever dared to call her. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by." Eleanor blinks, struggling to process what's happening. Part of her wants to slam the door shut to shield herself from the flood of memories threatening to overwhelm her. But another part, the part that still remembers the comfort of Martha's embrace and the sound of her laughter, takes over. "Come in," she says finally, stepping aside to let Martha enter. "You must be freezing." Over the next few days, Eleanor and Martha cautiously rebuild their connection. At first, their interactions are awkward, filled with long pauses and tentative smiles. Martha explains that she left all those years ago because she had no choice. Her mother fell ill, and she needed to return home to care for her. By the time she was ready to come back, the estate had new staff, and she assumed Eleanor had moved on. "I thought about writing," Martha admits one evening, as they sit together in the kitchen, sharing a pot of tea. "But I didn't know what to say. I was afraid you'd hate me." Eleanor shakes her head, her chest tightening with emotion. "I could never hate you," she says quietly. "I missed you, more than you'll ever know." As the days turn into weeks, Martha becomes an integral part of the household once again. She helps Eleanor with the children, cooks meals that remind her of her childhood, and offers advice when Eleanor confides in her about her struggles with Charles. Slowly but surely, the bond they once shared begins to reemerge, stronger than ever. But while Eleanor welcomes Martha back with open arms, not everyone shares her enthusiasm. At first glance, Martha's presence in the household seems like a blessing. Sophia and James adore her, often choosing to spend their afternoons with her instead of attending the structured activities Eleanor has meticulously planned for them. Charles, too, appears indifferent, at least outwardly, though his occasional glances at Martha carry an edge of suspicion Eleanor can't quite place. But beneath the surface, subtle shifts begin to occur. Eleanor notices it first in herself. There's a strange ache in her chest whenever she sees Martha laughing with the children or tucking them into bed at night. It's not jealousy exactly, not at first, but something deeper, more primal, a fear that Martha might somehow overshadow her, taking over the role she's worked so hard to perfect as the ideal mother and wife. Then there are the whispers. The staff, ever observant, begin exchanging knowing looks when Martha is mentioned. "She's been here before," one maid murmurs to another during breakfast prep, "back when Mrs. Eleanor was just a girl." Though they mean no harm, Their words plant seeds of doubt in Eleanor's mind. What do they know about Martha's past? And why does it feel like everyone else understands something she doesn't? Eleanor tries to brush these feelings aside, convincing herself that she's being irrational. After all, Martha has done nothing but help since returning. She's kind, reliable, and genuinely cares for the family. Yet, the more Eleanor pushes these thoughts away, the louder they become, gnawing at her resolve until she can no longer ignore them. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Eleanor finds Martha in the kitchen humming softly as she washes dishes. The scene is almost painfully familiar. It's the same image Eleanor remembers from her childhood, except now it's happening in her home, with her family. For a moment, she stands frozen in the doorway, watching Martha move with practiced ease, her hands deftly scrubbing away remnants of dinner. "You don't have to do that," Eleanor says finally, her voice sharper than intended. "We have people for this." Martha turns, startled, then smiles gently. "I don't mind," she replies. "It gives me something to do while everyone else rests." Eleanor forces a smile, though it feels brittle on her lips. "Still, you're not here to be a maid," she says, stepping further into the room. "You're here for the children. That's what we agreed on." Martha nods slowly, sensing the tension in Eleanor's tone. "Of course," she says carefully, "but sometimes it feels good to take care of things myself. Old habits die hard, I suppose." There's a beat of silence, heavy and charged, before Eleanor speaks again. "Do you ever regret coming back?" she asks abruptly, surprising even herself. Martha blinks, caught off guard by the question. "Regret?" she repeats, setting down the dish towel. "No, Ellie, never. Why would you ask that?" Eleanor shrugs, avoiding Martha's gaze. "I just wonder if maybe things were better the way they were before." For a moment, Martha says nothing. Then, softly, she replies, "Things change, love. People grow apart and come back together. That's life. But I wouldn't trade the time I've had with you or your children for anything." Her words should comfort Eleanor, but instead, they only deepen her unease. Because deep down, she knows Martha is right. Life does change, and sometimes those changes leave scars that never fully heal. As weeks turn into months, Eleanor's discomfort grows. It starts with small things. The way Sophia runs to Martha instead of her when she falls and scrapes her knee. The way James begs Martha to read him bedtime stories instead of asking Eleanor. These moments, insignificant on their own, accumulate into a growing sense of inadequacy that Eleanor struggles to suppress. She begins to second-guess every decision she makes as a mother. Should she enroll Sophia in piano lessons? Or would Martha think it's unnecessary? Would James benefit more from playing outside with Martha than attending the elite preschool Eleanor painstakingly researched? Each choice feels like a test. One, she's terrified of failing. Charles, meanwhile, remains largely oblivious to the brewing tension. When he is home, which isn't often, he praises Eleanor for hiring such a capable nanny. "She's wonderful with the kids," he remarks one evening over dinner. "They seem happier since she arrived." Eleanor forces a tight smile, stabbing at her food with unnecessary vigor. "Yes, she's very helpful," she mutters, unable to keep the bitterness out of her voice. Charles raises an eyebrow, sensing something amiss. "Is everything okay?" he asks. "Fine," Eleanor snaps, standing abruptly. "Excuse me." She retreats to her bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Once inside, she sinks onto the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. Why does she feel this way? Martha hasn't done anything wrong. If anything, she's made Eleanor's life easier. So why does it feel like she's losing control? The breaking point comes unexpectedly during a charity gala hosted at their mansion. Eleanor has spent weeks preparing for the event, ensuring every detail is flawless, from the floral arrangements to the gourmet menu. As guests mingle in the grand ballroom, sipping champagne and admiring the view, Eleanor moves among them with practiced grace, her smile unwavering despite the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Martha, dressed modestly in a simple black dress, stays in the background, assisting the catering staff and keeping an eye on the children, who are playing quietly in the adjacent sitting room. Eleanor catches glimpses of her throughout the evening, each siding chipping away at her composure. Then, disaster strikes. Sophia, bored with the quiet games Martha suggested, wanders into the ballroom in search of her mother. Spotting Eleanor across the room, she runs toward her, holding up a drawing she made earlier that day. "Mama, look!" she exclaims, tugging at Eleanor's sleeve. "Miss Martha helped me make it." All eyes turn to Eleanor, whose face flushes with embarrassment. She glances down at the drawing, a colorful depiction of Sophia, James, and Martha, holding hands under a bright sun, and feels a surge of irritation. Couldn't Martha have kept the children occupied elsewhere? Did she really need to parade them in front of everyone like this? "Not now, darling," Eleanor says tersely, gently pushing Sophia away. "Go find Miss Martha. She'll take care of you." Sophia's lower lip trembles, hurt flashing across her face. "But, Mama, I said go," Eleanor hisses, her voice low but sharp enough to make Sophia flinch. The little girl scurries off, tears welling in her eyes. Martha, witnessing the exchange from across the room, hesitates for a moment before following after her. Eleanor watches them go, guilt twisting in her gut. But before she can dwell on it, one of her guests approaches, complimenting her on the success of the evening. Smiling mechanically, she pushes the incident to the back of her mind. Later that night, however, as she lies awake beside Charles, the memory replays in her mind like a broken record. She thinks about Sophia's tear-streaked face, about Martha's concerned expression, and about the growing distance between herself and her children. And for the first time, she wonders if bringing Martha back was a mistake. The days following the charity gala are tense, though neither Eleanor nor Martha addresses what happened directly. Sophia avoids her mother, clinging to Martha instead, while James seems confused by the sudden shift in dynamics. Eleanor tries to act as though everything is fine, but the cracks in her facade are becoming harder to conceal. One morning, as Eleanor sips her coffee in the sunlit kitchen, she overhears Martha speaking softly to Sophia in the next room. The conversation is muffled, but snippets drift through the open doorway. "Kibri, your mama loves you very much. Sometimes grown-ups have bad days." Eleanor's grip tightens on her mug, her knuckles whitening. She tells herself it's none of Martha's business to comfort Sophia after her mistake. After all, isn't it Eleanor who should be reassuring her daughter? Yet, the thought only fuels her frustration. Why does Martha always seem to step in where she doesn't belong? Later that day, Eleanor confronts Martha in the laundry room, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "I appreciate your help," she begins, her tone clipped, "but I'd prefer if you let me handle my own children." Martha pauses, folding a towel in her hands. Her expression remains calm, though there's a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "Ellie, I wasn't trying to interfere," she says gently. Sophia was upset. "I just wanted to make sure she felt safe." "Safe?" Eleanor repeats, her voice rising. "You think I can't keep my own child safe? That's not what I meant." "Well, it's certainly what it sounded like," Eleanor snaps, cutting her off. "Maybe you forget your place here, Martha. You're an employee, not part of this family." The words hang heavy in the air, sharp and unyielding. For a moment, Martha looks as though she's been slapped. Then, slowly, she nods, her jaw tightening ever so slightly. "As you wish, Mrs. Eleanor," she says, her voice formal now, devoid of warmth. "I'll remember my place." Eleanor watches her leave, guilt prickling at the edges of her conscience. But rather than apologize or soften her stance, she doubles down, convincing herself that Martha needed to hear those words. If anything, it will remind her of the boundaries Eleanor has worked so hard to establish. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor becomes increasingly controlling, micromanaging every aspect of Martha's role in the household. She insists on approving the meals Martha prepares, dictates the exact times the children should nap, and even goes so far as to monitor their interactions. Any deviation from her instructions is met with thinly veiled criticism. At first, Martha tolerates it, attributing Eleanor's behavior to stress or exhaustion. But as the scrutiny intensifies, she begins to feel suffocated. The joy she once found in caring for the children dims under the weight of Eleanor's constant oversight. Even Sophia and James sense the tension, growing quieter and more reserved around both women. One afternoon, while helping James with his homework, Martha glances up to find Eleanor standing in the doorway, arms crossed and lips pursed. "What are you teaching him?" Eleanor demands, her tone accusatory. Just basic math, Martha replies, gesturing to the worksheet on the table. He's doing well. I'll decide what he needs to learn, Eleanor retorts, stepping closer. She picks up the worksheet, scanning it briefly before tossing it aside. This is too advanced for his age. Stick to the curriculum I provided. Martha bites back a retort, reminding herself that arguing won't solve anything. Instead, she forces a polite smile. Of course, Mrs. Eleanor, whatever you think is best. But inside, something shifts. The patience she's shown Eleanor for years begins to wane, replaced by a simmering resentment she can no longer ignore. How could Eleanor, who once relied on her so completely, treat her with such disdain? It's during one of these strained encounters that Eleanor's insecurities reach a tipping point. While going through old boxes in the attic, ostensibly searchings for holiday decorations, she stumbles upon a dusty photo album she hasn't opened in decades. Flipping through its pages, she finds pictures of herself as a child, always accompanied by Martha. There they are at the beach, building sandcastles. There they are baking cookies in the kitchen, flour dusting their cheeks. Each image is a reminder of the bond they once shared, a bond Eleanor now fears has been irreparably damaged. And then, tucked between two photographs, she discovers a letter. It's addressed to her parents, written in Martha's neat handwriting. The date at the top indicates it was penned shortly before Martha left all those years ago. Curiosity, and perhaps a hint of dread, compels Eleanor to read it. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I hope this letter finds here with gratitude for the opportunity you've given me to care for your daughter. Ellie has brought immense joy into my life, and I consider her family. However, circumstances beyond my control require me to return home indefinitely. Please know this decision was not made lightly, and I deeply regret any inconvenience it may cause. With sincere apologies, Martha Eleanor stares at the letter, her heart pounding. At first glance, it seems innocuous enough, a simple explanation for Martha's departure. But as she reads it again, certain phrases stand out. Circumstances beyond my control. Deeply regret any inconvenience. What exactly were those circumstances? And why does the letter feel so incomplete? Her mind races, piecing together fragments of memories she'd long suppressed. She recalls overhearing her parents arguing about Martha shortly before she left. Something about inappropriate familiarity and setting boundaries. At the time, Eleanor dismissed it as adult nonsense. But now, doubt creeps in. Was there more to Martha's departure than she realized? Determined to uncover the truth, Eleanor confronts Martha later that evening. Holding the letter aloft, she demands answers. What really happened when you left? She asks, her voice trembling with emotion. Why did you never come back, Martha? Freezes, caught off guard by the question. For a moment, she considers deflecting, offering a vague response that would placate Eleanor without revealing too much. But looking into Eleanor's eyes filled with hurt and betrayal, she knows she owes her the truth. There were complications, Martha admits finally, sinking onto the edge of the couch. Your parents didn't approve of how close we'd become. They thought I was overstepping, blurring the lines between caretaker and friend. When my mother fell ill, they saw it as an opportunity to end things cleanly. Eleanor listened silently, her chest tightening with each word. So you left because of them? She asks, her voice hollow. Because they told you to? No, Martha replies firmly. I left because I had no choice. But I never stopped thinking about you, Ellie. Never stopped wondering if you hated me for abandoning you. Tears well in Eleanor's eyes, but they're quickly replaced by anger. Why didn't you fight for me? She whispers, her voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Because I was afraid, Martha admits, her own tears spilling over. Afraid of losing you completely, afraid of ruining the life you deserved. For a moment, the room is silent except for the sound of their breathing. Then, abruptly, Eleanor stands, her expression cold and distant. Well, maybe you should have thought of that before coming back, she says, her voice icy. Because now, thanks to you, everything's falling apart. The revelation of Martha's past decision and Eleanor's inability to reconcile her feelings about it pushes their relationship to the brink. What little trust remained between them evaporates. leaving behind a toxic mix of bitterness and regret. Eleanor becomes obsessed with finding ways to assert her dominance, determined to prove that Martha's return was a mistake. Meanwhile, Martha struggles to maintain her composure, torn between her loyalty to the children and her growing disillusionment with Eleanor. She begins to question whether staying is worth the cost, not just to herself, but to Sophia and James, who are caught in the crossfire. It's only a matter of time before the tension reaches its peak, culminating in a confrontation that will change everything. In the days following their confrontation in the living room, the atmosphere in the mansion becomes suffocating. The once warm and inviting home now feels like a battleground, with Eleanor and Martha circling each other warily, neither willing to back down. Sophia and James, sensing the strain, grow increasingly anxious. They tiptoe around their mother, afraid of saying or doing anything that might ignite her temper, while clinging to Martha for comfort. Eleanor, meanwhile, becomes consumed by a toxic cocktail of emotions: guilt, anger, and fear. Guilt for lashing out at Martha, anger at herself for feeling vulnerable, and fear that she's losing control, not just of her household, but of her identity as a wife, mother, and woman of status. To compensate, she doubles down on her efforts to assert authority, scrutinizing every detail of Martha's work and interactions with the children. One morning, Eleanor discovers that Martha has taken the children to the park without informing her first. It's a minor infraction. Martha often takes them out for fresh air, but this time it feels like a deliberate act of defiance. When they return, Eleanor greets them in the foyer, her arms crossed and her expression icy. "Where were you?" she demands, her voice sharp enough to make Sophia flinch. "The park," Martha replies, calmly removing James's jacket. "I thought they could use some exercise." "You didn't ask permission," Eleanor snaps, stepping closer. "You don't get to make decisions about my children without consulting me." Martha stiffens, her patience wearing thin. "They're not prisoners, Ellie," she says, using Eleanor's childhood nickname deliberately. "They need freedom to play and explore. They're my children," Eleanor hisses, her voice rising. "Not yours. Stop acting like you have any claim over them." Sophia and James exchange frightened glances before retreating upstairs, leaving Martha and Eleanor alone. For a moment, silence stretches between them, heavy and electric. Then, quietly but firmly, Martha speaks. "I'm not trying to take your place, Ellie," she says, "but if you keep pushing everyone away, including me, you'll end up with nothing." Eleanor recoils as though struck, her face flushing with rage. "Get out," she whispers, her voice trembling. "Just get out of my sight." Martha hesitates, searching Eleanor's face for any sign of remorse. Finding none, she nods stiffly and walks away, leaving Eleanor standing in the empty hallway, her chest heaving with unshed tears. Over the next week, Eleanor avoids Martha entirely, delegating tasks through intermediaries and refusing to acknowledge her presence. Martha, for her part, continues working diligently, though her demeanor grows more subdued. She spends less time interacting with the children, fearing that further involvement will only exacerbate the situation. Charles, who has been traveling for business, returns home oblivious to the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. He notices the tension immediately, however, when Eleanor barely speaks during dinner and Martha keeps her head bowed, focusing intently on clearing plates. "What's going on here?" he asks one evening, glancing between the two women. "Nothing," Eleanor replies curtly, avoiding his gaze. "Everything's fine." Charles frowns, unconvinced, but doesn't press the matter. Instead, he announces that he's hosting a charity gala at the mansion the following weekend, a high-profile event attended by some of the city's most influential figures. Eleanor forces a smile, nodding enthusiastically despite the knot of dread forming in her stomach. As preparations for the gala ramp up, Eleanor seizes the opportunity to regain control. She assigns Martha menial tasks far below her skill level, ensuring she remains occupied and out of sight. Meanwhile, she immerses herself in planning every detail of the event, determined to prove to herself and everyone else that she's still the perfect hostess, the epitome of grace and elegance. But deep down, she knows the truth. The gala isn't just about impressing guests. It's about proving something to Martha, about showing her and perhaps herself, that she doesn't need anyone else to maintain her facade of perfection. The night of the gala arrives, and the mansion transforms into a glittering spectacle. Chandeliers cast shimmering light across marble floors, and the scent of fresh flowers fills the air. Guests mingle in the grand ballroom, sipping champagne and admiring the opulent decor. Eleanor moves among them with practiced ease, her smile radiant and her posture impeccable. Behind the scenes, Martha works tirelessly alongside the catering staff, ensuring everything runs smoothly. Despite Eleanor's attempts to marginalize her, she refuses to let personal grievances interfere with her professionalism. She checks food platters, refills drink stations, and discreetly manages any issues that arise, all while staying out of sight. For a while, it seems as though the evening will pass without incident. But then, disaster strikes. During dessert, a guest compliments Eleanor on the seamless organization of the event. "Your staff must be incredibly efficient," the woman remarks, gesturing vaguely toward the kitchen. "Who oversees them?" Eleanor freezes, her smile faltering for the briefest moment. Then, recovering quickly, she gestures toward Martha, who happens to be passing by with a tray of glasses. "Oh, that would be Martha," she says, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "She's been indispensable." Martha pauses, startled by the sudden attention. Before she can excuse herself, Eleanor continues, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "In fact," Eleanor says, raising her glass as though making a toast, "why don't we all thank Martha properly after all she's done so much for us over the years? Isn't that right, Martha?" The room falls silent, dozens of eyes turning toward Martha. She stands frozen, clutching the tray tightly, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Eleanor steps closer, her expression cold and calculating. "Tell them, Martha," she says softly, though her words carry. "Tell them how you abandoned me when I needed you most, how you left without a word and came crawling back like nothing had changed. Surely they'd love to hear your side of the story." Gasps ripple through the crowd as guests exchange shocked glances. Martha stares at Eleanor, disbelief and hurt etched into her features. For a moment, she considers defending herself, explaining the truth about why she left. But looking into Eleanor's eyes, eyes filled with malice and triumph, she realizes it wouldn't matter. Nothing she says will change what Eleanor has already set in motion. Instead, she sets the tray down carefully, straightens her shoulders, and meets Eleanor's gaze head-on. "You're right, Ellie," she says, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I did leave, and maybe I should have fought harder to stay. But one thing I never did was abandon you completely. That's something only you can do, to yourself and to everyone who cares about you." With that, she turns and walks away, leaving Eleanor standing alone amidst the stunned murmurs of her guests. The gala ends abruptly after Martha's departure, the festive mood shattered by Eleanor's public display. Guests begin filing out, whispering behind their hands as they go. Charles confronts Eleanor in private, demanding an explanation for her behavior. When she refuses to provide one, citing exhaustion and stress, he storms off, visibly disappointed. Upstairs, Sophia and James sit together in their shared bedroom, listening to the commotion below. Neither speaks, but their expressions say everything: confusion, sadness, and a growing realization that their mother isn't the person they thought she was. As for Eleanor, she retreats to her bedroom, locking the door behind her. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she stares at her reflection in the mirror, searching for answers in the unfamiliar face staring back. What has she done? And more importantly, can she undo it? The morning after the gala, the mansion feels eerily quiet. The remnants of the event, half-empty bottles of champagne, discarded napkins, and wilting flower arrangements, are scattered throughout the house, but there's no sign of the usual bustle that follows such gatherings. The staff moves silently, avoiding eye contact with Eleanor as they clean up the mess. Even the air seems heavier, charged with an unspoken tension that lingers like a storm cloud waiting to break. Eleanor sits alone in the dining room, staring blankly at a cup of untouched coffee. Her reflection in the polished mahogany table is pale and drawn, her usually immaculate appearance marred by dark circles under her eyes. She hasn't slept. Instead, she spent the night replaying the events of the gala over and over in her mind, each memory more excruciating than the last. When Charles enters the room, his presence is immediate and imposing. He doesn't sit down or pour himself a drink. Instead, he stands across from her, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither speaks. Then, finally, he breaks the silence. "What the hell was that last night?" as he demands, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the stillness. Eleanor flinches, startled by the raw anger in his tone. "I don't know what you mean," she replies evasively, though her voice wavers. "Don't play dumb with me, Eleanor," Charles snaps, slamming his palm against the table. The sound echoes through the room, making her jump. "You humiliated that woman in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what people are saying about you, about us?" Eleanor opens her mouth to defend herself, but the words catch in her throat. She wants to explain, to tell him about the years of resentment, the insecurities that drove her to lash out. But how can she put into words something she barely understands herself? "She deserved it," she mutters finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She betrayed me." "Betrayed you?" Charles repeats incredulously. "By being kind to our children? By helping you when you couldn't handle everything on your own? That's not betrayal, Eleanor. That's loyalty, something you clearly don't understand." His words hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless. She looks up at him, searching for some trace of the man who once loved her unconditionally. But all she sees is disappointment, and worse, pity. "I did what I had to do," she says weakly, though even she can hear the lack of conviction in her voice. "No," Charles corrects her, his tone icy. "You did what you always do. You pushed people away because you're too afraid to let them get close, and now you've alienated one of the few people who genuinely cared about this family." Before she can respond, he turns and walks out of the room, leaving her alone once again. As the door clicks shut behind him, Eleanor buries her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time in years, she allows herself to cry, not just for what she's done to Martha, but for the life she's built on a foundation of fear and control. Meanwhile, Martha sits in her small apartment downtown, staring at the stack of papers spread across her kitchen table. Among them is a letter from an attorney she contacted late last night, shortly after leaving the gala. The lawyer specializes in employment law and has agreed to take on her case pro bono, citing the clear evidence of emotional abuse and defamation Eleanor subjected her to. At first, Martha hesitated to pursue legal action. She didn't want to drag Sophia and James, or even Eleanor, through the ordeal of a trial. But as the hours passed and the reality of what happened sank in, she realized she couldn't stay silent. Not only for her own sake, but for the sake of anyone else who might find themselves in a similar situation. Picking up her phone, she dials the number the lawyer provided. When the call connects, she takes a deep breath and begins speaking, her voice steady despite the weight of her decision. "I'm ready to move forward," she says. "Whatever it takes, I want to make sure this never happens again." On the other end of the line, the lawyer nods approvingly. "Good," he replies. "We'll start drafting the complaint today. Trust me, Martha, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for justice." As she hangs up, Martha feels a flicker of hope, a small but powerful reminder that she still has agency, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Back at the mansion, Sophia and James sit together. In their shared bedroom, surrounded by toys they no longer feel like playing with. Both children are unusually quiet, their expressions somber, as they process what they witnessed the night before. "Why did Mama do that to Miss Martha?" Sophia asks, finally breaking the silence. Her voice is soft, tinged with confusion and hurt. James shrugs, kicking at the carpet with his socked feet. "I don't know," he admits, "but it wasn't fair. Miss Martha didn't do anything wrong." Sophia nods, hugging her knees to her chest. "Do you think she'll come back?" James shakes his head. "I don't think so. Not after what Mama said." They fall silent again, the weight of their mother's actions settling heavily between them. Though they're too young to fully understand the complexities of adult relationships, they instinctively recognize the cruelty in Eleanor's behavior and It scares them. Later that afternoon, Sophia approaches Eleanor in the library, where she is attempting to distract herself with a book. "Mama," she says tentatively, standing in the doorway. Eleanor looks up, startled by the interruption. "Yes, darling?" she asks, forcing a smile. "Are we ever going to see Miss Martha again?" Sophia asks, her big brown eyes filled with uncertainty. Eleanor hesitates, caught off guard by the question. For a moment, she considers lying, telling Sophia that Martha left because she wanted to, or that everything will be fine soon. But looking into her daughter's face, she realizes she can't bring herself to do it. I don't know, sweetheart," she admits finally, her voice trembling. "Maybe not." Sophia's lower lip quivers, and she turns away without another word, running back to her room. Eleanor watches her go, guilt twisting painfully in her chest. She knows she's losing her children, not to Martha, but to the toxic patterns she's allowed to define her life. Weeks later, news of Martha's lawsuit against Eleanor spreads like wildfire, dominating headlines and fueling endless speculation among the city's elite. The case becomes a media sensation, with reporters camped outside the courthouse and socialites dissecting every detail over lunch. For Eleanor, the trial is a nightmare. Every day she's forced to relive the events of the gala, answering questions about her treatment of Martha and the toll it took on their relationship. Witnesses, including members of the household staff and several gala attendees, testify to her erratic behavior and growing instability. Even Charles takes the stand, reluctantly recounting the confrontation that followed the gala and expressing his concerns about Eleanor's mental health. Through it all, Eleanor remains stoic, refusing to show weakness in front of the judge, jury, or public. But inside, she's crumbling. Each testimony chips away at the carefully constructed image she's spent decades maintaining, exposing the cracks beneath the surface. Martha, on the other hand, emerges as a figure of resilience and grace. Her testimony is heartfelt and honest, painting a picture of a woman who sacrificed everything to care for a family that ultimately turned its back on her. When she describes the pain of being publicly humiliated by someone she once considered a friend, the courtroom falls silent, moved by the depth of her emotion. By the time closing arguments begin, the verdict seems almost inevitable. In the end, the court rules in Martha's favor, awarding her substantial damages for emotional distress and defamation. The ruling sends shockwaves through high society, with many viewing it as a long overdue reckoning for Eleanor's actions. For Eleanor, the fallout is devastating. Charles files for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and gains primary custody of Sophia and James. Friends and acquaintances distance themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose reputation has been irreparably tarnished. Stripped of her wealth, status, and family, Eleanor retreats into solitude, grappling with the consequences of her choices. Martha, meanwhile, uses the settlement to start anew. She writes a memoir detailing her experiences, which becomes a bestseller and sparks important conversations about class disparity and workplace abuse. More importantly, she reconnects with Sophia and James, who visit her regularly and express their love and gratitude. As for Eleanor, she spends her days reflecting on the life she could have had, if only she'd chosen kindness over control, connection over perfection. It's a painful lesson, but one she knows she must carry with her for the rest of her life. Months after the trial, Eleanor moves into a modest apartment downtown, a far cry from the sprawling mansion she once called home. The space is sparse, decorated with little more than the essentials: a bed, a small dining table, and a few pieces of furniture salvaged during the divorce settlement. Gone are the crystal chandeliers, the marble floors, and the staff who once catered to her every need. For the first time in years, Eleanor must cook her own meals, clean her own dishes, and navigate life without the safety net of wealth and privilege. At first, she struggles to adjust. Simple tasks feel overwhelming, and the silence of her new surroundings presses down on her like a physical weight. She spends hours staring out the window, watching people pass by on the street below. They seem so ordinary, so content in their routines, while she feels like an outsider looking in on a world she no longer belongs to. Her nights are the hardest. Sleep eludes her, haunted as she is by memories of the past, the laughter she shared with Martha as a child, the warmth of Sophia and James hugging her goodnight, the pride in Charles's eyes when they first married. These fragments of happiness taunt her now, reminders of everything she lost because of her inability to let go of control. One evening, unable to bear the emptiness any longer, Eleanor picks up the phone and dials Martha's number. Her fingers tremble as she presses each digit, unsure whether Martha will even answer, or if she should hang up before it rings. But then, unexpectedly, Martha's voice comes through the line. "Hello?" Eleanor freezes, caught off guard by how steady and calm Martha sounds. It's me," she stammers finally, her voice cracking under the weight of unspoken apologies. There's a long pause on the other end. Then, softly, Martha replies, "I know. Eleanor begins, tears welling in her eyes. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong, so wrong, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I regret what I did." Another pause follows, heavy with emotion. When Martha speaks again, her tone is measured but not unkind. "Thank you for calling," she says. "That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," Eleanor admits, clutching the phone tightly. "But I had to try. You deserved better than what I gave you." Martha sighs, and for a moment, Eleanor fears she'll hang up. Instead, she says, "We both made mistakes, Ellie. Maybe we both thought we were protecting ourselves. But in the end, we ended up hurting the people we cared about most." The words hit Eleanor like a punch to the gut, forcing her to confront the truth she's spent months avoiding. "I don't know how to fix things," she whispers, her voice breaking. "I don't even know where to start." "You already started," Martha replies gently. "By admitting you were wrong. That takes courage." Eleanor swallows hard, nodding, even though Martha can't see her. "What happens now?" she asks, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's up to you," Martha says simply. "But remember this, redemption isn't about undoing the past. It's about learning from it and choosing to do better moving forward." With that, the call ends, leaving Eleanor sitting alone in the dim light of her apartment. For the first time in what feels like forever, she allows herself to cry, not out of self-pity, but out of recognition of the person she's become and the work she still has ahead of her. While Eleanor grapples with her isolation, Martha embarks on a journey of healing and reinvention. Her memoir, titled Through the Cracks, A Story of Resilience, WIWAM, becomes a cultural phenomenon, sparking conversations about class inequality, workplace abuse, and the importance of empathy in human relationships. Readers from all walks of life connect with her story, praising her courage and resilience in the face of adversity. The proceeds from the book allow Martha to purchase a cozy cottage near the countryside, where she spends her days gardening, writing, and mentoring young women, navigating similar challenges. She also establishes a foundation dedicated to supporting domestic workers, providing them with resources, legal assistance, and advocacy tools to protect their rights. Sophia and James visit Martha regularly, bringing laughter and joy back into her life. Their bond grows stronger with each passing month, filling the void left by Eleanor's absence. During these visits, Martha shares stories of her childhood, teaching them valuable lessons about kindness, humility, and the power of forgiveness. In turn, they share updates about school, friends, and their dreams for the future, reminding Martha that love and connection can transcend even the deepest wounds. Though she occasionally thinks about Eleanor, Martha chooses to focus on the present rather than dwell on the past. She knows forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means releasing the hold anger and resentment have over your heart. And for Martha, that release brings a sense of peace she hasn't felt in years. For Sophia and James, the aftermath of the trial marks a period of growth and self-discovery. Living primarily with their father, they adapt to a simpler lifestyle, one defined less by material wealth and more by meaningful connections. Charles encourages them to pursue their passions, whether it's art for Sophia or science for James, fostering an environment where they feel supported and valued. Despite the distance from their mother, Both children maintain a complicated relationship with Eleanor. They visit her occasionally, though these encounters are often strained and awkward. Eleanor tries her best to reconnect, attending school, events, and baking cookies in an effort to recreate the warmth she once shared with them. But the trust she shattered will take years to rebuild, if it ever fully does. Over time, Sophia and James come to understand that Eleanor's actions weren't a reflection of her love for them, but rather a manifestation of her own insecurities and fears. This realization helps them process their feelings, allowing them to move forward without carrying the burden of resentment. In many ways, the experience strengthens their bond with Martha. She becomes a surrogate mother figure, offering guidance and support whenever they need it. Through her example, they learn the value of compassion and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Years later, Eleanor stands outside the courthouse where the trial took place, staring up at its imposing facade. It's a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air smells faintly of fallen leaves and possibility. She's dressed simply, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her coat. Beside her sits a leather-bound journal filled with reflections she's written over the years, a record of her journey toward redemption. Inside the building, a panel discussion is underway, hosted by none other than Martha. The event draws a large crowd, eager to hear her speak about overcoming adversity and finding strength in vulnerability. As Eleanor watches through the glass doors, she sees Martha step onto the stage, greeted by applause that fills the auditorium. For a moment, Eleanor considers leaving. She doesn't belong here, not anymore, but something stops her, rooting her feet to the ground. Perhaps it's curiosity, or maybe it's the faint hope that she might one day find a way to contribute to the world beyond her mistakes. As Martha begins speaking, her voice carries clearly through the open doors. "Life is messy," she says, smiling warmly at the audience. "It's full of pain, loss, and moments we wish we could take back, but it's also beautiful. Every challenge we face teaches us something about ourselves, and every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change someone's life." Eleanor listens intently, her chest tightening with emotion. Though she knows she may never fully repair the damage she caused, Martha's words remind her that healing is possible. Redemption isn't a destination, it's a process, one that requires patience, humility, and a willingness to embrace imperfection. When the event concludes, Eleanor lingers outside, unsure whether to approach Martha. Just as she's about to leave, however, Martha spots her through the crowd. For a moment, their eyes meet, and Eleanor braces herself for rejection. Instead, Martha smiles, a small, tentative gesture, but one filled with grace. "Thank you for coming," Martha says softly as she approaches. "It means a lot." Eleanor nods, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you for sharing your story," she replies. "It's helping me find mine." They part ways shortly after, exchanging no further words, but as Eleanor walks away, she feels a flicker of hope, a quiet reassurance that while the road ahead may be long, it's one worth traveling. The screen fades to black, accompanied by soft piano music. A text overlay appears, offering viewers a final message. Every choice we make shapes the lives we lead and the legacies we leave behind. Let us choose wisely, act with compassion, and strive to build bridges instead of walls. Before the video ends, a subtle call to action appears. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more thought-provoking content. Together, we can create a community rooted in empathy and understanding.